Ladies and gentlemen, this is Tom Lacovara-Stewart, Resurrect the Republic, RTR Truth Media Group. I am on the line with who I consider my brother, my friend, Ammon Bundy. Good Lord knows we've been through so much together, and hopefully we're not finished in this world fighting for the principles of freedom and to restore some of the morality back into life that we see so lacking. Ammon, welcome to this broadcast. We're at a struggle right now, a division in so much of what's going on, and I seek to heal some divisions and divides that we see going on. I think that a lot of people may be very misunderstanding of what's going on, and I know people that want to, in so many ways, support law enforcement and the rule of law, the real, true constitutional rule of law, and they sometimes get confused with what that means with what we're looking at today. Can you illustrate to me maybe what your feelings are on this division of what I consider to be a very important movement?
Well, Tom, I hope that I can articulate this. I believe in my mind and certainly in my heart that I have it at least somewhat correct. And I need to say this, that we have to make sure that we come to our conclusions based upon correct principles. And we also have to realize that there's not just there's just not two extremes. There's not an extreme one way and an extreme another way. That there is middle ground. And
yeah, I agree.
And we keep seeing these kind of extreme one way and an extreme another way, and we think that we have to go and file suit on one extreme or the other. And I don't believe that is accurate, and I don't believe that that's what we need to do. So, anyway, with that being said, I would like to get down to the, talking about correct principles, so that we can, find that true balance of what is going on and what should go on and what do we need to do to correct this problem. Because there certainly is an issue, an extreme issue. Maybe I shouldn't use that word in that way after my...
No, it is. I think there is an extreme issue. I think that's accurate.
I mean, there's an extreme issue when it comes to, our law enforcement as well as an extreme issue when it comes to both sides of this argument, if you will.
Well, the Bible says in Romans that the just shall live by faith, and I know that we've been kind of castigated sometime by the liberal media who seeks to demonize anything Christian, God forbid. But these principles of faith that we live upon, is based upon a privilege. And when I say a privilege, I mean liberty. And when liberty, I mean it's given by God. It's a permission given by God to live free in righteousness, I believe. That's my personal beliefs. And according to that belief, I think that we all should have a freedom to express ourselves. Now, I know that there's been a lot of talk recently about Blue ISIS. Look, my best friend in this world, who wrote a letter to me for the judge in the case that, with Malheur, is a cop. And he saw a lot of of things he was not comfortable with in his department. And he resisted those things. He came under castigation for those things. And he was forced to eventually move to a different department who was not as corrupt and not as self-serving as the department that he was in. But ultimately, there are men and women in law enforcement who believe as you do and as I do in the principles of freedom and in the basis of the foundations that were laid to preserve them. So I have, my father was a judge, you know that. My father was a judge. My stepfather was a criminal investigator for the prosecutor's office. So I'm not an automatic anti-cop kind of person. I hear these terms like blue ISIS being used, and I think that people may misunderstand what that message, and I don't use that terminology only because I educate people, and I like to be able to sit down with a cop, buy him a cup of coffee, and share with him my ideas. Like I told you when I was in the institution that I was in, I'm not going to specify because I don't want to bring any attention to the individual, but I would spend a couple hours every time some certain person was on his shift to share with him my feelings, my thoughts, and my ideas about what was going on in this country. He ended up resigning and moving on. I actually think I wish he would have stayed only because I think that would have been more beneficial. But we have in America today law enforcement that is, for lack of a better term, community-based, community-organized. It's communitarianism. Some people call it communism. It's a fusion, I believe, of communism and fascism that's been brought about a level that is far beyond the officer. Most police officers have absolutely no clue of the agenda. I listened to Charlotte Iserbyt, who worked for Ronald Reagan under his education administration, illustrate to us how these fascistic programs were being implemented. And even Reagan went on national television and said that the Department of Education should be abolished. Why do we have a federal Department of Education? It should be handled by local communities and towns of parents, on the local level. This shouldn't be handled by the federal government. And so I guess, all of this education, the training of law enforcement, what we see being implemented in America today is, in my opinion, it's communitarianism, which is a fusion of corporate fascism. It's not capitalism. It's corporatism or corporate fascism and Marxism kind of fused into what they called the third way. And it's anti-biblical, it's anti-Christian, it's anti-Christian tenet. And, I'd like to see America come back to the point where they realize what's going on without having to castigate people, without having to necessarily, because not for anything. I was in a car crash, and one of the guys that saved my life was a cop. The cops they've fused a very honorable profession, which is peace officer, in with revenue generation and policy or social change enforcer. And then they have us in a Hegelian dialectic where, well, if you're anti-cop, then you're this. And if you're pro-cop, then you're statist. And what breaks my heart is that people aren't seeing the driving agenda, which is so beyond the cop. It's beyond the individual pawn. I look to the bishops on the chessboard and the castles. What is your opinion on that?
Well, I've said it before, and I believe that it's a correct thing, and that is the only control we have is self-control. And so it does come down to the individual to do what is right and or choose not to do what is right. I mean, I personally don't believe that another man is responsible for, another man's sins. I mean, we are accountable for our own sins, our own actions. That's a correct principle. It has to be that way. You can't say that I'm going to do something wrong, but it's not my fault. I mean, now if you do something out of ignorance, then you are not knowingly or willfully, disobeying God or sinning, or whatever term you want to give it, violating human rights. I mean, if you are knowingly and willingly doing it, then you are the one that's accountable. And if we're talking about an officer of the law, then so be it. And so I see a tremendous amount of officers of the law, police officers, there's some terms there that you got to be careful with because it's been changed into something that it's really not. But I'll just use officer of the law as the true individual that has authority to enforce law. I'll just say officer of the law. You see them on the street and they are violating human rights and they are accountable for it. However, you also have to look at the system that they're in, the training that they have been received, and even the mentality, almost the, brainwashing is kind of an old word that has a lot of thoughts that are attached to it. But I'm going to say brainwashed to believing that they are something that are not equal to everybody else, that there's something higher, and that their word, they're even taught this, that their word, every word that comes out of their mouth is law.
Yeah.
I mean, and when you're taught these things and you're told by, your supervisors, the trainers, you go to the federal law enforcement training centers and they teach you this, that now as an officer of the law, one holding a badge to enforce law, you now have the power of law. And when your word is spoken, it is law and everybody must obey. Well, that is incorrect. That is an incorrect principle.
Sure it is.
And it gets a tremendous amount of officers in trouble. And what I mean by that, not necessarily maybe in trouble with the organization, but it gets them in trouble with what is right. And ultimately with God, because they are not, all men are equal. And God is no respecter of persons. So,
right.
They have no more right to tell somebody what to do than anybody else. And they have no more right to take away somebody's life, to incarcerate somebody, take their liberty, or to take their property. They have no more right than any other person. And
unless you were harming another individual.
That's what I'm saying. When does an individual, whether they're a law enforcement officer or whether they're any other individual in this world, what right? When does that individual have a right to take a life?
Right.
I mean, they only have a right to take a life when they're trying to defend their own or defend their neighbor's life.
That makes me think back to a situation that just happened not too long ago here in Arizona of a man who was, and this is based on the community-oriented policing that Charlotte Iserbyt talks about, of people taking apart. Well, somebody called in and said they saw a man with a rifle in a hotel room. Now, of course, you're in Arizona, so you're not necessarily in any violation, right, of having a rifle in a hotel room. You could be cleaning it. Somebody could see you through the window, but you're lawfully, this is not something that's unlawful, right? So the police show up. They give this man instruction. It ended up being like a pellet gun or something that he used for his business. I think that he was in pest control or something. And and they were giving him confusing instructions, and this police officer just guns him down in the hallway of the hotel room when he's giving him all these conflicting commands that are confusing him. And my question is not even so much for the officer that pulled the trigger, but for the other officer that was standing there. Why did you not immediately at least stop the actions of the officer who transgressed upon this man's life, who put this man? See, my problem isn't with the officer here and there who violates the rights. My real problem is with these departments that cover it up, that don't act in honor and protect the public regardless. We put this position, this job of accountability into the very hands of the agencies of which these guys work with every day. I think that that's counterproductive, and I think it prevents them. It's like through conflict of interest, right? Like if you're my brother, I'm going to try and protect you, right?
Well, there is certainly that, you know. I mean, and I have actually taken as a warning when someone says, well, he's my brother and, you know, I'm going to stand with him no matter what. I mean, a lot of times we think, oh, that's honorable, right? But actually I have in the experience that I've had over the last few years, I have now learned that that's a key word to corruption.
Yes.
And I mean, it doesn't matter if you're neighbors. It doesn't matter if you truly are brothers, family, or if you're in a law enforcement, or if you're, you know, I heard it in the attorneys, among the attorneys. I heard it among, you know, those that are incarcerated. I mean, you know, and that's a wicked thing. And, yes. But also kind of backing up to the situation here, I believe in many of these instances where, you know, an officer kills somebody or does something and then nothing is really done. I truly believe that they believe their departments, you know, and their supervisors and their training and everything, basically, consider those things as not wrong. As not being. I know. You know, like, and that goes back to the mentality and the inequality that they perceive themselves against the people.
It's almost like they seem. Isn't it almost like they seem, and for lack of a better, I know this goes down a rabbit hole, but it almost seems like that officer is some sort of title of nobility that grants them special privileges over and above the individual, that we empowered them. We gave them this responsibility to protect and preserve the rights of the people. And it seems like they've taken this and they've turned it, they've you know, in some way turned it into a title of nobility that grants them special privileges over and above what you and I would hold that empowered them.
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, not you kind of hesitate on saying that, but no, that's exactly what has happened. They literally have taken up the title of nobility, meaning, you know, they say law enforcement officers. I don't believe that's the correct term, but, you know, an officer of the law, and basically, and kind of give a little background to, you know, you could probably give a lot more in-depth background about the titles of the nobility, but the founders in the Constitution made titles of nobility illegal.
Yes.
And why? Why did they do that? Because, you know, there was different titles of nobilities, like, you know, lords, and I mean, there was all kinds of them. And they could actually get away with, you know, taking property or whipping like a peasant, or even if there was like a dispute, they could even kill, and then the courts would look at them different. They would, and actually legally look at them different because they were a noble. They were nobles. And so that it wasn't equal. Again, it was an inequality. And that's
or even empowered or even empowered by the nobles' enforcers. And that's historic back into Scotland, into England, and we've seen it replete in history. Yes.
So you have to focus on the inequality, though, because we get back to the principles, right? God made us all equal. He gave all man liberty, and He gave us our lives, and He set forth a process in which we can own and control property for the benefit of our happiness, a pursuit of happiness, the way the founders defined it or said it. And we're all equal. And all of us are equal. A law enforcement officer is not a superior. He does not have any more rights or privileges or authority than any other man. And
right.
Now, so let's break this down a little bit. Again, we talk about what right does an individual have to take a life. And the only right that an individual has to take a life is when he is defending his own life or the life of his neighbor.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
And so what right does a law enforcement officer have to take a life?
I would
submit, exactly the same.
I would submit, my stepfather, like I said, he was a investigator for the prosecutor's office. And he drew his gun, I think, twice in his entire career. And it was only when he was, not when somebody moved a certain way, but when he was actually directly fired upon. In my opinion, back in the day, going back some decades, and I think that there's been an incrementalism that has been going on here with this movement in law enforcement, this radical progressive change. But he was trained that you didn't fire unless either almost or directly fired upon. It was a matter of honor. You don't just. In other words, today we have people that are gunned down for reaching for their cell phone, and there's no visual of a gun. There's no direct threat to the law enforcer. There's this suspicion that maybe they might have. It's like pre-crime. It's not a crime. And
there's certainly no deficit in examples of law enforcement, killing people when really their life wasn't in danger or the lives of any others were in danger. I know.
So am I wrong for calling it cowardly?
Well, it's funny because we used to. I love Louis L'Amour, and he writes the Westerns, and one of the things that was according to him and his writings, and he was a historian, and I mean there was no doubt about it. And his writings were there's a lot of accuracy in the way the culture was in the West and so forth.
Yeah, well, you and I should both know that I got a chance to read a lot of that where I was, and I bet you did too.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that Louis L'Amour, or at least in his writings, talks about a lot is dry gulching. To dry gulch somebody. And what that was is when someone would hide in the hills, and when an individual walks by or, from a distance, he would shoot them. And, and how dishonorable that was. They would even, you're a dry gulcher, when they talk about a criminal. And rather than facing the person, and basically confronting him honorably. And this was something that, and now look at, we like, and I might open up a can of worms now, but we actually, in many ways honor snipers.
Oh,
soil.
You're about to go down a road that I completely agree with you on. Poor Jesse Ventura.
I don't want to go down another path, but
it's a valid path.
Well, and, kind of bringing it back to, our domestic troubles here with law enforcement is, look, in Arizona, there was a 400-pound woman that the officers had a problem with. She came out of her apartment with a hammer in her hand, and they shot her.
Yeah, that's cowardly.
And they shot her from a distance away. And then they claimed that it was, in defense of their lives.
Yeah. It's like, you know what? If you're that scared, in my opinion, this is just my personal opinion, and having a stepfather in law enforcement, a father who was a judge, I grew up with people in law enforcement. In my opinion, if you find yourself so threatened that you have to shoot a woman under those pretenses, then you picked the wrong career.
Yeah, well, Tom, you're right. There's no doubt you're right, but they are trained that it is okay for them to do that. And why are they trained? Because
right. Why are they trained that
way?
And
because they're literally there is a very wicked reason why. But ultimately, when it comes to the individual officer of the law, he has to ask himself, is his life in danger or the life of somebody else? And if it is not, he has no right to kill or to use violent force. He has no right to use force.
Years ago, I was a fireman, and we put our lives in danger every day, right? And I know that was against a force of nature that we couldn't draw, and bear down upon. But I had a lot of friends that were cops. And like I said, the one cop that wrote a letter for me in the situation at Malheur was one of my best friends, and he happens to be quite upset with the modern law enforcement practices and how they're being trained, who they're being trained by. And one of these things, and I know that this is an uncomfortable subject for a lot of people to delve into, but New York and many other police departments have made it so that if you have above a certain IQ, you cannot be a law enforcement officer in their department because they feel as though you may become bored with your job and the money that they provided for your training may be wasted. So this is the justification. This has been upheld in the courts that they're allowed to discriminate against people with a higher IQ to become law enforcement officers in lieu of having people who are of a lesser IQ. And I think that's an extremely dangerous precedent to be set, because these officers, when they progress to the next level, become detectives, then they become lieutenants, then they become captains, then they become chiefs. So if you draw from a lesser intelligence factor or IQ, and this doesn't say that all cops out there are stupid. I'm not trying to say that, but these are facts that are published by the New York Times, the Washington, all of the papers that we usually don't like have admitted that law enforcement agencies today, they are in fact implementing these hiring procedures that hire people with a lesser IQ so that they don't get bored with their jobs. But what kind of insanity? If you're going to put the power of life and death in a man's hands, do you not want the most absolutely credible, intelligent individual to be able to hold that power? And it makes me think back to when I was in federal holding, right after I left Pahrump, where you and I were. I read a biography of Wyatt Earp, and I was quite impressed. This was the autobiography of Wyatt Earp. This man who chose not to wear his guns most of the time, who chose to interact with people on a human level. It was really an amazing autobiography that I shared with one of the U.S. Marshals that would bring me to court regularly. The same U.S. Marshal, by the way, that said, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up for bringing people who were standing up for their country to prison. I kid you not. I feel as though that the Lord put me in the place that I was, and for whatever reason I made the decisions that I made to be among people like this U.S. Marshal that I could talk to on a human level. And this is why I think it's so important to reach out to people that are in this profession. Because this particular man who was a U.S. Marshal, I said, you need to keep, I'm telling you, you need to get the Wyatt Earp autobiography, and you need to read it. And I kept telling him that every time I saw him. The final time that I saw him, he said, I didn't sign on for this. And it affected his heart that the reason that I came to Oregon to stand with you and to stand with the rest was the reason that people were being persecuted by a law that was never intended to be used the way, or at least it wasn't purported to be intended the way it was used against the Hammonds. And of course, you know, I've been a little bit critical of President Trump, and I've praised him where he's done things right. I don't worship any man but Jesus Christ that walked the face of this earth, including you. I want to make that clear, by the way, for all of our listening audience, who may say, oh, the Bundy call. It's just stupid analogies they make. Ammon is my brother. He's my friend. But the only man that I ever worshipped that walked the face of this earth was Jesus Christ. But you're my brother and my friend. So I say that, and when I reached out to this man, in his heart, he resonated with the fact that people who stood up for their fellow man were being thrown into prisons and given sentences, and he was not comfortable with that. Not only that, but the like I told you, the correctional officer who ended up resigning because he did not feel comfortable with. And you know, Ammon, I feel uncomfortable with people resigning out of these professions only because when they leave these professions, what do they leave left to continue on in these professions?
Well, and you're right. And I actually, while I was in the solitary confinement one time, I was there a lot, but I wrote about this very thing, and I you know, recommended that they stay in their offices, but that they have a duty to make a change, to make a difference. Not just make a difference, to make a stand. Because we're past the point of just making differences. I mean, we're way past that. You know, in many ways, you look at a sinking ship and you go, well, why should we just go rearrange the furniture? You know, and that's where a lot of people see it. And I, to be honest with you, I don't know that they're wrong. But an individual who is good and who is good at heart in their heart and loves people, loves their fellow man, and he's in a position where he's an officer of the law, he can do so much good.
Oh yes.
However, there will be a consequence for them, especially as they have to stand alone. And that's why, I mean, if you have, several officers that would stand with you and say, no longer are we going to, follow quotas where we have to give so many tickets out and arrest so many people a week. No longer are we going to draw our guns, or follow this escalation training rather than de-escalation.
Right.
I mean, we're not going to do it anymore. No longer are we going to set in training among 50 or 60 other officers and let them train us that somehow our lives are more important than those that we were called to defend. I mean, and if they would stand and say, no, this isn't right, then they, even if they lost their job, is it not their duty to do that? I mean, they have a duty to say it is not right. And so back to kind of, do they stay in their offices? Yes. If you're going to do some good. If you're not, you're like salt that has lost its savor. You're good for nothing. And that's exactly.
It absolutely is their duty to do that. And, I illustrated this. I know that, it's a post that I made, but, in Stalin's, and, people are using the term, in many respects, blue ISIS. And I posted something today, and I wanted people to reflect, and I wanted them to really think about something historically, because history is important to me. It's what I am. I'm a historian. You know that. We've sat and we've talked at length about all kinds of issues. But one of the things in history that I see that's playing in America today, that's playing out in America today, is the same concept that Stalin used. And Stalin did not call these people terrorists. He called them quite accurately useful idiots. And when I say useful idiot, I want to say to my audience, I consider myself to have once been one of them. I'm not using that as a slur. I'm not using that as, and it's not my term. It's Stalin's term. And Stalin used this term to describe people who were not of a Marxist mentality that he could use to effectuate the agenda that he was trying to bring about, and through enforcement. And I think that's more accurate than the term. And I'm not going to castigate anybody for using whatever term, but all I'm saying is that what I see happening in America today, it's almost like, as a historian, I'm watching history repeat itself. And it's almost like I'm watching the movie Idiocracy. I don't know if you've ever heard of that or not, but the movie Idiocracy, a bunch of Tide Pod eating people who don't understand the history of the world, that this agenda is being played out upon them to bring about revolutionary change. We heard that with Obama, but it really wasn't just Obama. And we get trapped in this right and left. And this is in my opinion, two wings of the same bird. We have on the left the more overt Marxists. On the right, we have the neoconservative Trotskyites, who are Marxists in a different, more conservative flavor. And, like Rahm Emanuel said, never let a good crisis go to waste. And that is to do things that you wouldn't normally be able to do. And people don't, they threw that video around and made fun of him, but I don't think that they really understand the real agenda that's going on to change radically and revolutionary change American law enforcement, to incorporate law enforcement with social interaction. Some people call it community-based or community, what do they call it? Community organizing principles or whatever it is. Charlotte Iserbyt defines this. Community orienting policing. So what it is like, you ever hear of these stories where somebody calls the cops and says, oh, well, my brother, he's real depressed and, he's got a gun and blah, 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 blah. And then the cops show up with a SWAT team outside somebody's house who doesn't have a gun, who doesn't, it's not the situation that was purported. And in this one case that I was reviewing tonight, they run into the house. This guy's in the shower, not hurting anyone, harming anybody. They kick in his door. They use a call from some outside individual, and they kick in his door. They shoot him with a rubber bullet. They tase him in the neck. They grab him by the testicles. They throw him down to the ground. And after all of this complete violation, they arrest him, and then they try and charge him with all of these offenses because now they realize, whoops, this guy was just taking a shower, and we have really no complaint against him. So they charge him with all of these things to try and cover their butts, and he's found not guilty. And in America, is that okay with you?
Well, but that happens all the time. I mean, that's not an isolated. I mean, that's a pretty extreme, but that happens all the time. I mean, let's look at like even like Bill Keebler. People know about him. Well, what happened there? He, don't get me wrong. I don't think he was the smartest guy in the situation, as far as, the way he acted. But basically, the FBI fabricated a crime. Then they recruited a perpetrator. They gave him all the tools, everything surrounded him by, FBI agents, and basically handed him this crime. And then when he doesn't even go through with it, but they arrest him and say, look, we're the heroes. We saved you, all you people out there from this man. And, now, now he's a, criminal or a felon.
Oh, that's going to lead me into.
Yeah, well, don't go there yet, but the thing is, your example is very common. And again, that is individuals choosing to be immoral, wicked, and that is what is filling our law enforcement offices. And that's where you cannot let the individual off. Anybody who was part of that, right, from all the way from, the officers that went into that man's house, to the prosecutors that are trying to cover now up there, to the judges. All of that comes down to individuals making decisions. And again, we are responsible for our own sins, not for somebody else's. And somebody else is not responsible for ours. And so ultimately, again, the only control we have is self-control. And when these things, they just consistently reoccur.
Yes.
And these people in these police departments, it frustrates me because I can almost say every dang one of them are doing it.
What? I have to say this. And this will help, I think, our message a little bit. I've experienced a lot of this corruption. And I saw a video of a young man who traveled across the country going from police department to police department, trying to sign a complaint against a law enforcement officer who he didn't actually have a complaint, but he wanted to go through the videotaping of the process on how it was done. And he was threatened, he was coerced, he was, all kinds of things happened to him. So the obvious nature is they can't police themselves. But what this leads me back into is what you were just talking about. What resonates to me is the case of Schaefer Cox, who after listening to this young man speak, after listening to the moral compass that he had and the love that this man has for his fellow man, and to watch the devious nature of federal law enforcement that was brought to bear upon this young man who was running for office, who had the support of his community, who really was standing on solid moral principles, disgusts me to a level that makes me angry. And I believe, Ammon, I think one of the most important things that we might be able to do is to resurrect one of the ideas that he implemented in the Liberty Bell system. I believe in that idea that he had. And I think that whether he be in prison or whether he be free, and I'm going to work every day in my life to try to do everything I can to advocate for the freedom of Schaefer Cox. But one of the things that the ideas that he gave us nothing else was that Liberty Bell system where you have a group of people in a community that have the same number, and you have somebody who volunteers as operator on different nights. And if somebody has one of these incidences where they believe that their rights are being violated, that they can call this number and people will come out, not with their guns. And this is the thing, Ammon, not with their guns, but with their cameras. And shine the light of truth onto what's going on. How powerful is that?
It is, and it was his ability to unify and to educate. And that is certainly why they felt they had to, basically destroy him. He's in prison now for 7 years. He's facing, or he's on a 20-year sentence, and now they're trying to double that up. And the man did nothing wrong. I mean,
what victim?
I don't need to tell you that, but
what victim?
But he literally,
what victim?
Well, not even that. I mean, you're right. There is no victim. There's nothing. But even they did exactly what they did to Todd Engel and Greg Burleson. In front of basically they charged him with false charges. They arrest him, and and then they, do motion of eliminate on almost all of the discovery that would exonerate him, so that the jury never didn't get to hear anything but what the prosecutors wanted them to hear. I mean, it is so unjust. Again, I'm with you that it makes you. I mean, it's closer to anger as we.
Well, it's righteous.
We should get there, but
is it not righteous indignation?
Yeah, I guess because there certainly is something inside a person that recognizes justice and recognizes injustice. And it can actually drive you to the point where you cannot find peace in this life. And I mean that in a good way, because when you know something is so unjust, and you see it, and it's there, and it's still going on, it makes you where you feel like you have to do something about it.
Yes.
You can't just sit and allow it to continue, and that is
not in good conscience.
Not in good, and that is how the case of Schaefer Cox is, and others, because these wicked prosecutors, these wicked, agents, federal agents, crafted this entire thing, fabricated it, conspired against this good man because
created it like a fiction novel.
Yeah, and then played it out, knowing exactly what they're doing. And now this man, who had I think a 2-year-old son and a new, wonderful little family. Now he's been he's young. I mean, I don't know how old he is right now, but he's young. And he spent the last 7 years of his life in federal prison. And he's facing, literally another, 30 plus years if they have their
I'm not ashamed to say this. I have spent nights literally, and this is one of the things that impressed me with your empathy towards these individuals, because similarly, I've spent nights with tears running down my face over Schaefer Cox, over Jeffrey Winehouse, over Ed Mullane Brown, over all of these political prisoners that have been targeted by what was never meant to be something that was wielded in a political arm, but to preserve and protect the rights of the individual, and only that. And these people have been brought to bear in a political prosecution. And, you know, it leads me back to why I came to the Bundy Ranch and why I came when you let us know what was going on at Malheur. It wasn't about Cliven Bundy in Nevada. To me, what resonated with me, aside from seeing your aunt thrown to the ground, which I have to tell you, pissed me off to the point where I couldn't see straight for a minute. But aside from that, I stepped back and I researched the situation, and I saw that 49 ranchers in Clark County, Nevada, had been pushed off their land through what I call, maybe our audience would agree with me, economic terrorism via color of law. And when I think about all of the other ranchers who we don't even know many of their names, we don't know their stories, but we do know that they were presented with the same pressure that was exerted against your father. And one of the reasons that I came to the Bundy Ranch, and one of the reasons that I believed in the cause, not so much, and when I say to my audience out there who's listening, when I say this isn't about the Bundys, I don't think that many of my audience who realize that what your father was fighting for was so much bigger than him. He is so not a narcissist. He is not about all himself. He was saying, look at this injustice that's been going on for decades. Look at all these ranchers that have been pushed off of their properties via the color of law. Yeah, no, I'm done with this. No. I don't accept this anymore, and this needs to stop. And that's why particularly I came. And I know that a lot of our audience, now, I'm not LDS. I'm a Christian. I do talk to the missionaries. They're great guys. I love them. But there's one thing that resonated with me with Ezra Taft Benson that said, you know, there will come a day, and this was a prophecy by Joseph Smith, there will come a day where the Constitution will hang by a thread, and members of this church will rise up, but not just members of this church. People will come from all around to stand for the principles of the Constitution. This wasn't about any one faith, any one religion, but it was about a principle that had been established for not just the faith or the freedom of the LDS, but the freedom and the faith of everybody, individual liberty, whether you chose to believe or not to believe, that people would recognize from all over the country that there was a problem. And I find that very, I guess, ironic, but at the same time, it resonates with me. You know, I spent a lot of time with Ryan, and he shared a lot of information with me. And you know, this, I have to say that this compels me to say that some of these things that have been foretold or prophesied have come to pass. Don't you think so?
Absolutely. A lot of them have come to pass. I mean, I you know, do not want to be the one to say that my family, you know, in any way has fulfilled those things, because I don't know that. But I do know that.
No, but I think you're a part of it. I don't say that you're the main focus.
Yeah.
But it's a piece of it. Of course, it's a piece of it.
It certainly is. I mean, and you, along with many others and myself, know that what has transpired over these last, you know, 4, almost 5 years has been miraculous. I mean, has been.
It has.
You know, it's been amazing. I mean, just the fact of, that, we stood against an army and they backed off and we, lived free, and then they arrested us, and we went through 2 major, political prosecutions.
Yes.
And we're delivered.
Yes. And I'm by the way,
completely delivered.
By the way, I'm still under a little bit of attack by the forces of the likes of the Southern Poverty Law Center and M.D. Lofter and Barbara Berg and all these individuals that I want to clarify something, because I've had a lot of emails and I've had a lot of questions about why were you kicked off of Malheur. I wasn't kicked off of Malheur. M.D. Lofter, and I don't like to usually bring her up, and I don't like to give her any publicity, but she created a lot of dissension and brought our name up, and I believe I know why. And it really isn't about me either. Okay, this isn't about me personally. But one thing that I had found when I was at Malheur in the basement was because part of the reason, my wife is Native American, and one of the concerns that I had was in the press, you guys were labeled as being desecrators of Native American artifacts and all of this other business, right? So when I came out there, Lavoie had assigned me to a building with Shauna Cox, and in that building, I just walked down into the basement, and I found something that so blew my mind that I had to go right to Lavoie. And I said, Lavoie, we have a real problem here. Here's Native American artifacts that are being literally, they're in rat poop and pee next to a hot water heater that is about to blow up. These people are creating a narrative that the people here are desecrating artifacts, all the while for the past 30 years. These artifacts have been sitting in this dank, dusty basement next to a hot water heater who's about to explode. The hypocrisy of the narrative that was being created. And then Lavoie, of course, did a video saying, please, Paiute people, come and take hold of your artifacts. We reach out to you. I respect you. And Lavoie, in fact, had quite an established relationship with the Native American community that was kind of downplayed by the press. That was not convenient to the narrative, but he did these videos. And right after these videos, I came under direct attack from people who were in the inside that we now know all the while were pretty much siding with the likes of J.J. McNabb and the Southern Poverty Law Center and these other Marxist groups. What really I mention this about is because the concern that I have is that our own Congress in the United States has given these people like J.J. McNabb and the Southern Poverty Law Center a platform to speak about so-called domestic terrorism. Ammon, we were 50 miles away from the town of Burns. We were of absolutely no threat to any individual whatsoever. And they completely took over that town. They terrorized that town. They shut down the school and turned it into an FBI command post. They literally psychologically terrorized that town. How many miles was it? Like 50 miles away from Malheur?
It was
something
35.
like that. 35. Okay,
35
miles away from Malheur. But nonetheless, were we at any point ever a threat to any of the townspeople, or even for that aspect, law enforcement? Were we ever a threat?
Never.
Never.
I mean,
Never. We wanted to reach out and shake their hand.
Yeah, we had elementary students coming into the refuge, along with hundreds and hundreds of other people, doing school reports on what was happening.
Yeah,
there.
school reports. I had reporters one day. I was working on the sign. Remember the Harney County Resource Center sign that I worked out with you and Ryan? That day, somebody called me to the main gate, and there was this very liberal reporter who I met at the main gate, and I picked him up and I drove him through, and I said, look, I want to let you know. I think he was from either Vox or Vice. I can't remember which one. I did speak to Vice, but I spoke to him and said, look, we just want to let you know, we love you. We want, not only do we want you to be free, we want your kids to be free, and we want people to know the truth. And the truth of the matter is that we're not antagonistic or militaristic towards anybody, regardless of their political ideology. We want to share with you the information that we've learned and try and bridge a gap here. Don't you find that to be the case, what was going on there?
Well, that was the whole point of it. I mean, we
right?
went in there for, because we saw this injustice and we were being ignored on all levels. And we couldn't just sit there. I mean, can you imagine all the things that, that we discovered what was happening to the Hammonds? I mean, the list goes on. They were, falsely accused on domestic terrorist charges as arsenal terrorists. Their water rights were taken away from them 20 years ago, like by force, after the state had ruled that their waters. I mean, they were denied access to their private property. They were forced to sign a first right of refusal. They were fined $400,000. They couldn't sell any of their property over $500. Didn't make any transaction over $500 without permission from the federal government. I mean, the list goes on and on. It was
you might as well be in the USFA.
Yeah, it was absolute despotism. And we all understood this and saw it, and we told the world. I mean, we had tens of thousands of people signing, our notice of redress of grievance. Yep. And yet the elected representatives, state, local, federal, they just wanted to ignore the whole thing and say, well, they had their day in court. No. The court process was exactly what we've now exposed. It's a wicked system process in which the prosecutors manipulate the courts so the jury doesn't hear the truth. Then the jury has nothing to do but to give the prosecutors what they have. And so my point in this is, Tom, after we, uncovered all of this and, pleaded with our elected representatives to do something, to do their job, and we were ignored, were we all just to say, okay, well, you know what, let's just go home, we know the Hammonds are they got to go back to prison for another, for the remainder of the 5 years, and, all of it is just, I mean, no, you cannot go home.
You can't.
After. No. And I wanted to go home so bad.
Liberty or death, brother.
I desired nothing more than to go home. But I knew I could not go home. Something had happened. I couldn't either. So then what do? So we went 35 miles out of town. Yeah. Way out of town.
Where no one was in danger.
And where no one was there in the middle of the winter on a bird farm, bird refuge, in the middle of winter. I mean, the best place ever to make a protest. Yeah. At the best time, no one was threatened, anyway, the rest of the story. But
I do, and so do our listeners. But years ago, I was really sick and in a lot of pain, and I made a lot of stupid decisions that brought me to a conviction long ago. When I was in Texas, however, it was long after I had given my life to Jesus Christ, and long after I had restored myself to sanity, and I had to make a decision. I knew that I had had a felony on my record, and when I spoke to you the night before I left, I made the decision to come to Oregon, not because of any other thing that existed in my life, but because I knew in my heart, let me backtrack just for a second. My mother, when I first learned about who you were, my mother was still alive. She was sitting in her computer room, and she watched the videotape of your Aunt Margaret being thrown to the ground. And she called me into the room, and she said to me, "Son, you need to come and see this. I don't even believe I'm witnessing this." And I came in, and she backed up the video, and she showed me the story of what was going on. And she had tears rolling down her face. Now, keep in mind, this is my same mother who lived in Fall River, Massachusetts. Her family goes back into the 1600s in this country, in Vermont and Massachusetts. Our family rode with the Ethan Allen's Green Mountain Boys in the Revolution. We have a cemetery in Vermont in Black Cemetery that has all of our relatives going from the 1600s on forward in my family. So to give you a little idea of who my mother was and the family that she came from and the things that brought her into being and all of the stories that she had been told as a little girl. We're of the family of the Stewarts, Crandalls, Bordens, Franklins, Andrews, so all the way back. My mom sat there and she watched that videotape of your Aunt Margaret being thrown to the ground with the dog snapping, and she brought me in and she showed that to me with tears rolling down her face, and she looked at the look on my face, and she said to me, "Shall I book you passage?" Because my mother knew me well enough to know. And here's something that I think, the reason I'm telling people this is because my mother, loving me like she does, was willing, because she knew what was at risk. She knew that by people coming to the Bundy Ranch that they were in great danger. But my mother, being a patriot, being a woman that I so love and respect, she was willing to send me or to go and do what's right. My mother was a very principled woman. She was a believer in liberty. She was a believer in God. She was a believer in the principles that established this republic. And she was willing at a moment's notice to send her son off. And this isn't really a story about me, but her. I remember when I got to the Bundy Ranch and I came up to your dad, I handed him the phone to speak to my mother. They've since purged this, by the way, off of YouTube. And they got to speak. It was a really very powerful conversation that your dad had with my mom. And my mom literally on her knees prayed for your family. And she even said to me before I left, this isn't about them. This is about what's right. And I thought about that the whole trip out there. And I thought about those what were they, 49 ranchers that were forced out of Clark County, Nevada? 52 ranchers. And what I call that is economic terrorism by the color of law, which leads me back into the point that I was originally trying to make earlier on in the show. I know that there has been, look, Jeanette Finicum, all of my love all of my respect to that woman who has gone through more pain than I could ever imagine. And I see a fracturing of this, whether it's a freedom or a patriot movement, whatever you want to call it, over a hashtag, over a non-issue where people recognize that law enforcement agencies have been brought to bear against us in forms of terrorism, whether they're political terrorism, whether they're economic terrorism, whether they're whatever form of terrorism you want. ISIS is just a term. It's just a way of saying terrorism. It's not.
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I know you.
No, go, please. Tell me what you think.
Because you're exactly right. Because it's funny because what you have is one party or faction or whatever extreme, as I said earlier, is calling the other party domestic terrorists, right? Terrorists.
Which is a legal term in the Patriot Act, by the way.
Yeah, and then you have the other party, or kind of the other extreme, which has, created this blue ISIS term, which is calling them terrorists. I mean, it's almost the exact same thing. And yet we think that we have to get on board with one or the other. And I'm telling you that
get on board.
The blue ISIS, the thing about the blue ISIS, hashtag, if you will, is
it burns people, makes them think.
It's effective, yeah. It's effective. Whether you like it or not, agree with it or not, it gets people to think, because literally what they're saying is that the law enforcement are terrorists, or at least
or hold on, I submit that law enforcement are being used, because a lot of these guys I know, and I would agree with a lot of the people out there who their hearts want to resonate with the law enforcement community, the guys that got into the job to want to serve and protect. I get all that, but they're being used as a tool to implement state-sponsored terrorism. Is that not what's going on?
That's exactly right. And when you look at what history teaches us, the very steps have been followed when it comes to law enforcement officers. The very steps in the past have been followed and are being followed now. And you're right, those people are being used. But the only reason, those people, those law enforcement officers are being used. But it still does not take away their responsibility to see that they're being used, to recognize it, and to not comply with their own policies, as the people should not comply to their commands and demands. I mean, it literally comes down to individuals, because again, the only true control we have is self-control. The only real control we have is self-control.
I've been saying for a long time that what should happen here is that the implementation of what I call committees of safety, who are able to have communication with a grand jury foreman, and the appointment of a special prosecutor that is not related to the prosecutor's office, who has to deal with police on a daily basis, because that in and of itself creates a conflict of interest, because you depend upon the police to make your case. So therefore, it would seem to me that the wise and reasonable alternative moving forward would be citizens' committees of safety, or people's committees of safety, picked from the random public, who could bring information to the grand jury foreman, and a special prosecutor not related to the prosecutor's office appointed to be able to oversee law enforcement in a manner which, this goes completely against the community-oriented policing and the Soviet model that we've adopted. And see, this is really, it gets to the root of some history that I'm going to be sharing upcoming on a anti-Marxist broadcast on the Santilli show. He's invited me on, and I'm going to make a presentation. By the time that you and I in this interview airs, it'll probably be done. But the history of the Soviet model that has infected American policing and the community-oriented policing, where you have, that if you see something, say something. It's come to the point where I watched a couple of individuals, just as an example, on a dock fishing, open carrying, lawfully, but because somebody picked up the phone and reported them, and that they were scared and that they were disturbed, it gave the authority of the police department in Florida to come out drawing down upon them. Brother, if I saw somebody drawing down upon me and I wasn't committing a crime, I would shoot them. And I would be justified. And this is not a radical view. This is what our republic was founded upon, was the protection of individual rights. And I don't want, nor do I seek, to draw down upon, to terrorize, or intimidate law enforcement.
Well, let me give you a very personal example of that. I spent I spent 2 years, last 2 years almost, in federal detention centers. I've spent a tremendous amount of it.
I can relate.
I spent a tremendous amount of it in solitary confinement. They broke my teeth, they broke my hip, they broke my eardrum, and they did a bunch of other things, to me. And then I was on all charges found not guilty, or the charges were dismissed. And it was uncovered that the entire thing was a plot and a conspiracy against my family. And
yes.
But I still had to, suffer that, right? And then I see that the courts and the prosecutors, none of them were reprimanded. Nothing was corrected to this point.
That was the biggest problem I had. Yes.
The same prosecutors are still on the case, and they filed now with the Ninth Circuit to overturn the decision to the judge to reconsider. Yeah. So
it's insane.
And then I remember our first couple days of trial. Well, first of all, they tried to keep me out of my own trial. They wouldn't transport me and I missed a couple days and several hearings because they wouldn't transport me to my own trial. And then the first couple days of trial, they get us in the elevators, and what I mean by say they, the U.S. Marshals get us in the elevators, and they rough us up to the point, we're handcuffed, they rough us up to the point where both Ryan and I wrists are bleeding. And they did that 2 days in a row. And so we're going into
Who were
the courtroom.
Were these U.S. Marshals that were transporting you?
Don't act surprised, Tom. This happens all the time. This was 2 years of this.
Good God Almighty! I have to
But
say,
they wanted us to be, completely shaken and frustrated and upset, before we go into this courtroom and have to present ourselves.
But they were U.S. Marshals, right? I want to be clear here. They were U.S. Marshals.
These were U.S. Marshals. Yeah, these were U.S. Marshals.
Good God!
And then they lied to the
God
judge.
Almighty.
even our attorneys, or even the public defenders even got upset when they saw the blood on our wrist. And it takes quite a bit before the handcuffs are designed to hurt you, but before they'll break blood. Of course. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm laying this out because it's a complete injustice, right? Literally, what was my family doing? My family's just ranching like we have for the last 40 years.
Right? You're not drug traffickers or... hey, Ammon, I have to ask you a question. Were you involved
let me make my
in
point
sort of arms trafficking like Fast and Furious or anything?
Well, you might think so, but the point I want to make is this, because we're talking about kind of what do we do? So now, I see them continuing to plot, and the very people that did this to us are still in power, still have the same power, and now they're mad, they're upset, and they're or not upset. I mean, here, how dare we lose? How dare,
how dare we exclude exculpatory evidence and destroy evidence and lie to the judge? How dare we do that?
Lie to the jury, interesting that in this case, the prosecutors, these very prosecutors, U.S. prosecutors who did this to us, were involved before the whole Bundy Ranch incident. They were filmed. There's a couple films on body cams of them being at the ranch during the incident.
Yeah, there's no conflict of interest there.
No, and this has been going on for, there's been this plot to try to destroy my father for over 20 years.
President Trump, are any of your representatives listening?
Look at where it personally puts me, Tom. They're still in power. They'll fabricate something up again. And they'll come after me and my family again. Am I supposed to just let them take me?
Ammon, I think that I can say this with confidence. Like I said earlier, this isn't about the Bundy family. It really isn't. American people, I want you to listen to me. My listeners, I want you to listen to me right now. A lot of people have thrown around a lot of terms that call worship. Look, Ammon right here, he's my brother, but he's not my master. My master is Jesus Christ. My master is truth. And really what I'm trying to live for is like everybody else out there trying to, and I fall short, trying to live for the principles that I've learned through what I believe is the Holy Bible and the faith of Christianity, in saying that there are some things that are right and there are some things that are wrong, and there are some things when they are wrong requires us to have faith and courage. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. And I think that is very important, because what happened to the Bundys, what happened to the Hammonds, and what has happened to people across this nation, it's not about them. It's about you out there listening in this audience. It's about your individual rights. It's about your freedom, regardless of what you believe in or fail to believe in, or on a progress or a path to believe in. But when it comes down to it, the rights of the individual is the minority of all. We hear about this term of minority. What is the quintessential minority but the individual? and the individual rights that we were granted by our Creator that were unalienable. Some people say unalienable. Unalienable, which means there cannot be a lien placed upon the rights that were granted to you by God. The rights to life, the rights to liberty. And when I say liberty, I mean permission. For those of you out there that say, well, doesn't, liberty, that's like in the Navy, that's like shore leave. It's the liberty, it's the permission that was granted to you by God. By God. Not by government, by God. I think that you may agree with me on this. Maybe you don't. I think you do, Ammon. But this liberty that was granted to us by God protects every single being in the United States of America and for likewise worldwide. But more importantly, there are communities out there that would say, oh, there's privilege, all these Marxist terms that we hear. But those people out there in those communities, those people out there in Nevada, in Las Vegas, I had an amazing plane ride with one of the most awesome African-American dudes I ever met in my life, who totally knew about everything that happened at the Bundy Ranch and was supportive of everything that happened there, who said to me, he shook my hand, Ammon, I almost cried. He shook my hand and he said, I know what you're fighting for us too. I almost fell out of my plane seat because he got it. Right. We're not fighting for us. We're not fighting for the Bundys. We're not fighting for the Hammonds. We're fighting for all individuals. Is that not true?
Well, yeah, that's what this has always been about. My dad would never, made a stand over some cows in the desert.
Right.
He clearly understood that this was about each individual and the rights that God has given them, and how those rights have been deteriorated to the point where our government, in most cases, professes and acts, and that it's not a right, that it's a privilege. It's not a right to live; it's a privilege, and it's not a right to be free.
That's what they tried to convert it into.
That it's a privilege, and that it's not a right to have property.
Well,
it's a privilege, and it's a privilege that we give you, and we can give it and we can take it. And
sure,
that is really what this is about.
What is the consent of the governed, Ammon? What is the consent of the governed?
Yeah, that's permission from the people to act.
Right.
And that's what it is.
What happens when we revoke said consent? Go away. Thank you for your services. We wish you not. May prosperity, help you in your endeavors, but
there's a term, Tom, that is in the Book of Mormon, and it's a prophet by the name of Moroni, and he has seen our day.
I do love Moroni. I'm not LDS, but I love Moroni.
Well, he has seen our day, and he warns us, about the secret combinations that are going to come against us in these days. And he warns us that, well, first of all, he says that you are in an awful situation, he says, because of these secret combinations that have been built up among you to get gain and power. He lists these things. And then he says, I tell you these things that you may not allow them, and I'm paraphrasing, but his term is to not let them get above you. And
right.
That is a very important term, not allow or not let them get above you. Because
right.
What happens when these wicked secret combinations, what's happening when they are above you meaning that they get control of the force of law.
Yes.
Meaning they get control these wicked conspirators, these secret combinations actually get in the position where they can control the force of law or the law enforcement.
Yes.
And that's why, where we come full circle here, that's why each individual police officer, officer of the law, has to recognize when they're being used, the training that is right or wrong. And they have to say no.
Ammon,
and then the individual.
There's been a lot of things said, and I want to go on the record here. For a lot of things being said about certain progenitors, and I'm not going to give them their minute of fame for attacking you or your Mormon Christian faith. But there's been a lot of progenitors, and I want to make it clear to my audience. There was a very long time ago views or a prophecy that was made by people that are not even of my particular what do they call that, a version of my faith. I'm Christian, right? Yeah. So, but there was a certain prophecy made that, and I believe in the Bible. And the Bible shows me that there will be those who will come forth and prophesy, right? For those of you Bible-believing Christians that have been critical over this whole LDS Christian, I want you to, I really want you all to consider for a moment the fact that we're all in the same fight. We all serve Jesus Christ. And that being of its importance, there are certain things that I've seen that I, as a Christian, as an independent, whatever you want to call it, I used to be a Catholic, I converted to non-denominational or whatever you want to call it. There was something that compelled me, and it had nothing to do with any specific denomination, but there was something that compelled me in my heart. And not just me, I'm just one of so many people that were drawn to make this stand. And I want you all out there who are listening to consider. I really want you to consider that some of these things that are prophesied really have weight. And they have weight in that they stand for certain principles that I think can resonate with any Christian. And any Christian listening to this broadcast tonight, they should at least give weight to the fact that we all stood for what we believed was not only righteousness and love for our Christian neighbor, and in support against a tyrannical, oppressive force, whether that be by whatever symbol or idol out there. Romans 1 states very clearly, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which they may be known of God is manifest in them. For God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and his Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that when God knew, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became in vain of their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and the birds as forfeited beasts and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanliness through the lusts of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. Folks, we are undergoing, I don't care about my detractors, we are undergoing spiritual warfare amongst people who seek to serve the creature more than the Creator. And I will be damned before I will submit to that which is the truth of God. And I think that, Ammon, I think that you could probably chime in on that quite a bit.
Well, there is no doubt in my mind that this is a spiritual battle more than anything. A battle of good and evil, a battle of the ability to choose, to defend and protect the agency of man, which is a fundamental principle of heaven. I mean, we cannot even have faith in God unless we choose it. We cannot choose faith. We cannot choose God. We cannot choose what is good.
Only
we cannot
by
grow
choice.
and progress. We cannot inherit the kingdom of God and all that God has through His Son if we do not choose. And so this agency, this ability to choose and to, weigh the right and the bad, or the right and the wrong, the good and the evil, and then make a choice, has to be protected. It is vital. And what we have is a situation where it is being threatened. The agency of man is literally being threatened. And it's being threatened by who? By those that are in power, those that we call and say are our government.
Yes.
And who is the point of that spear? The point of the spear are the law enforcement officers. And no matter what, if it is a wicked spear and you're at the point of it, and if righteousness is going to stop that spear, the first brunt is going to be at the point. And so law enforcement officers cannot get offended when people are trying to stop them from violating the very fundamental principles of agency.
Absolutely.
Do not get offended. If you do not want to be offended by that, then do not be the point of the spear in taking the agency of man. And that's your individual choice, and you will be held accountable for those individual choices that you make. You cannot say, well, I was told that. You cannot say that they were going to take away my, benefits or or I was going to lose my job, or that, I would be ousted, or I would be viewed as not standing by my brothers. Yep. All of that is wicked terminology when it comes to doing what is wrong. And
absolutely wicked.
You cannot sit there and be the point of the spear in taking the agency of man and not expect to be stopped by people who are trying to defend and protect the agency of man. That's ultimately what it comes down to. Still there, Tom?
Yeah, I told you about my friend who had written me a letter. He was a police officer, wrote me a letter for a character reference for Judge Aiken in my case related to Malheur And this man, and the reason that I'm bringing him up is because he had real problems within his department of certain things that were going on. He was essentially, he felt as though he had to leave that department, which was, by the way, my father's department, as he was judge for many years before he passed away. And back in those days, my father, he would do things like this, man. When he had somebody that would come in front of him for a certain offense, he would try and find an alternative measure of punishment that wasn't acquiescence to the state. In other words, for instance, he would have a young man that would come in with long hair. And he'd say, you know what, young man? I think what you're doing is destructive unto yourself. Go out there and cut your hair and come back into my court next week, and we'll set aside all of the penalties. This was not in a benefit for the state because it didn't generate any revenue for the state. It didn't do anything to empower the state. My father, though, and get this, Ammon, my father was a Democrat. Blew my mind when I really learned of the complexities of these things. My mom was a Republican. My father was a Democrat, so I call myself a Republicrat. But he would rather make somebody make a sacrifice in their personal life that would benefit their personal existence, that would teach them a lesson that would not harm them because they didn't have a victim, but he would want to put them on the right path. That was the judge of my childhood. What I have seen the judge of today become makes me shudder to my core. Mm-hmm. When the judge in the Hammond's case said that he could not give them the mandatory minimum, for if he did, it would be a, and I quote, shock to the conscience. A federal judge in federal court was waving a red flag going, bing, 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 bing. There's a problem here. This is not being used the way it was supposed to be used. This was supposed to be used against terrorists, not against American citizens. And if I use this, it'll be a shock to the conscience. What more of a message do we need from our own federal courts? This is why I get frustrated, Ammon, is because there are people that are members of our federal courts who recognized what was going to come. And as far as I am concerned, the words of that judge, long before any other not guilty verdict was weighed or any other thing happened, the words of that judge warned and justified the righteous stand that I saw that you took. Your thoughts?
Tom, you're exactly right, and your passion is warranted. I just want to point out to people that the very U.S. prosecutor, and I'm not talking to the assistant U.S. attorneys, the U.S. attorney who went through these re-sentencing and sending the Hammonds back to prison for the second time for the mandatory minimum. That U.S. attorney's name is Billy Williams. And today, he is still the U.S. attorney.
And why?
And yeah, he is responsible for this. He knows damn well what they did. He knows that those charges, 18-1855, that's actually that they were. That's the charges they should have used if they were going to use that. But that those domestic terrorist charges, that's arsenal terrorists, were used inappropriately. But see, they will not check themselves.
Yeah.
He, in multiple writings, before I even really started making, a public, a lot of publicity in Burns, he wrote letters and published them in the local newspaper, trying to get people to to believe that the Hammonds had a fair trial, that they had their fair day, fair day in court.
Yes,
and
fair day in court that a federal judge said was wrong.
Yeah, and even the Farm Bureau supported this idea that the Hammonds had their fair trial and supported this letter that was written by this wicked man, Billy Williams, who still is U.S. attorney for the District of Oregon. And
yeah, that blows my mind. I'm sorry.
And that's why, I hesitate to say that the swamp is being, drained. Nothing has happened in the District of Nevada
part
to
of the swamp,
these people.
Part of the swamp is this SES we keep hearing about, and American intelligence media and many other people have illustrated the depths of the SES, these Obama appointees. But I'd like to urge people to really critically think. One thing that Chris Ann Hall says that really superly resonates with me is principles over party. And we have to understand as conservatives, and I am, and I know you are, conservatives. I don't say Republican because the Republican Party has become, from the 1930s on, infected by neo-conservative Trotskyites, big government, redistribution, big military, war all over the planet, Republicans. The flavor of conservatism, and that means that it holds some of those traditional values, which traps people into the false paradigm that they believe. Look, one of the reasons that Ron Paul resonated with me, and I'm sure resonated with your father, because I know Ron Paul resonated with your family. This is something that I've spoken to your father about at length, is because Ron Paul realized one very important thing: the very limited role and authority of government. So it really comes down to, what is their proper role? Did we not, as states, independent nation states, bring into creation a compact or a federal government that its primary purpose was to preserve and protect the rights of the most minority class there ever existed, the individual?
Yeah. Because the conversation started out this way. The very purpose of an officer of the law, his sole purpose, his entire existence as an officer, is to protect the people's lives, liberties, and property.
Amen.
And so, if that is his very purpose, and it is clear, there's no doubt that is his purpose. Now the training and all the things are corrupting that, and they're not giving him that those, I'm not saying none of that's happened, but his purpose
I
is
understand.
to protect the people that he is in the jurisdiction of, to protect their lives and their liberties and property. And so whenever a life is taken, he or she, as a law enforcement officer, has failed. Whenever liberty, which means an arrest, whenever there's an arrest, they have failed.
Yeah.
And whenever property, such as, I can't think of the right term right now. It must be getting late.
It is getting late.
Asset forfeiture, or whenever property is taken, then they have failed, and yet they are, more and more on a rapid increase, taking life because they forgot their purpose, taking liberty. I mean, to the point where there's even quotas where they have to arrest so many people a week, no matter what, whether the people
quotas,
are done wrong or not.
Quotas.
I mean, that's a direct violation. I mean, not just a violation. I don't want to just keep saying that.
No, it's beyond that. It's revenue generation.
But what I'm saying is, it is a complete contrary to the very premise of their job.
The principles of liberty, regardless.
Yeah, and yet, do they just not know this? Are they truly brainwashed to such a point that they don't consider these things?
I can answer that question in that the agenda that has been pushed, and this agenda has been pushed by federal funding, which you are well aware of. You made a post just recently. You and I conversed about briefly about these this federal money that goes to local police departments, and they require of these police departments for them to submit to or acquiesce to certain federal guidelines of enforcement that these local departments may not have otherwise given up to. Is that not true?
Yeah, one thing that I've been able to see over the last couple of years is a tremendous amount of law enforcement, and never was my desire. So what I have noticed is that they are all equipped almost identical. And it doesn't matter if you're in Oregon, Washington, Nevada, or really anywhere in the United States. I'm talking to the point where their radios are all the same. Their uniforms, everything. They might be different colors. They might have a different badge, but they are literally equipped. Their vehicles, the lights in their vehicles, they
might as well be federal.
The ammunition, the weapons, they're all the same. And why?
Let me tie.
Why? And
let me tie.
The answer is. Go ahead.
No, let me tie one more thing into you that may shed some light onto what's going on. All right, folks, we're going to go into an area right now that's really controversial, which is the Parkland shooting in Florida. And I'm not going all conspiratard on you guys about all of the other distractions that we've seen. What I'm going to talk to you about right now, listen to me, public, when I say this to you. Kids' lives for cash, that is a hashtag, kids lives. Number 4, cash. And I'm going to explain this to you. A lot of people have gone down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories and all of that. And really, to be honest with you, Ammon, I don't discount any of that. I don't really pay attention to it because what the conservative Treehouse and RTR Truth Media and Lori Anderson and myself have investigated was an Obama-era program, and this program was intended to eliminate the children from school to prison pipeline for marginalized people. And for those of you out there that don't understand the term marginalized people, this is a Marxist buzzword for persons of color. And I don't mean, I have many friends who are Hispanic, Asian, American Indian, and by the way, Ammon does too. We had people standing with us at Malheur. I have a photograph of an individual when I think it was Vanity Fair published the smear that we were white supremacists in the Harney County Resource Center, otherwise known as the Malheur Refuge. Was the guy I was teamed up with was an African American male who he and I went everywhere together. Not only did we go everywhere together, we were friends and we enjoyed each other's company. So this narrative that's being pushed is a Marxist narrative, okay? So I want people to understand that for a moment. So when we take it back to Parkland, Nicholas Cruz, there was a program called the Promise Federal Grant Program under the Obama administration that was supposed to limit the school-to-prison pipeline. It was a wonderful sounding thing. Who wants kids, Ammon, you and I, who wants kids to go from school into prisons, right? It always sounds good, doesn't it? These socialist programs, they always sound wonderful. And they have these wonderful intents. But this is what happened, folks. I'm going to tell you. I want you to listen very carefully. In Miami-Dade County, this program was implemented. Let me tell you what it did. We have affidavits from law enforcement officers that say that they were instructed to ignore crimes that were created or committed by those of certain races to lessen the statistics of crime in their jurisdictions. And in response to this, the SROs, or school resource officers, and their departments would be granted additional federal funding. Let's do a fast forward to Parkland. Nicholas Cruz. He was not a white, considered by the establishment to be a white individual. He was one of Hispanic heritage, and I don't discriminate against him, and neither does Ammon in any way whatsoever. But this program, what did it do? It created an environment where police officers not only had contacts with this individual, and folks, I know there's all kinds of conspiracy theories out there about Parkland. I'm talking to you about the real dollars and cents, like my stepfather taught me to follow. Follow the money, stay away from the BS, okay? I'm following the money. You guys want to follow the other angles to it? God bless. But I'm following the facts, okay? This Obama Marxist program to eliminate persons of color from the school to prison pipeline caused officers in Miami-Dade County to be ordered to suppress facts. To suppress, if they came across a kid with drugs, they would take the drugs, but they wouldn't report the kid, thus letting him go, thus enabling crime. Well, let me tell you something, folks, what that does. Once the criminal population realizes that you're not reporting them, what do you think happens? But that crime, it's so wicked. It's so wicked. It's so wicked. Nicholas Cruz, one of the guys that reported Nicholas Cruz was called Benny the Bondsman. Now, Benny the Bondsman, I wouldn't have known about this, Ammon. I wouldn't have known really in depth about this, but for a personal, lifelong, from the time I was a kid friend from New Jersey, who was friends with Benny the Bondsman, who noticed this guy, Nicholas Cruz, to have made these threats online, and he called the FBI. And he said, yo, you got a problem here. This guy's threatening to shoot up a school. The FBI, the state police, the school resource officers acted appropriately because the real truth was federal grant money was involved. The suppression of crime statistics prevented these cops from providing this information adequately to their so-called superiors who were ignoring this evidence because they were making tons of money. This is why the conservative Treehouse and RTR Truth Media, I titled this hashtag Kids Lives #4 Cash. Kids Lives for Cash. Because when it came down to it, this is what was happening, Ammon. We found it in Miami-Dade. We have affidavits from law enforcers who not only were instructed to, but did, find kids with contraband like drugs, and they did not report the names of the individuals, but they would log the evidence in and say that it was found, and they wouldn't subscribe it to a certain individual, because if they had subscribed it to a certain individual, the crime statistics would have lessened their federal grant money. Folks, you want to talk about corruption? You want to talk about the perversion? You want to talk about the cause of the Parkland shooting? You really want to talk about that? Let's not talk about guns. Because when I was a kid, we had guns in our pickup trucks, and no one ever shot up our schools. You want to talk about problem, creation, solution by government that creates grant programs that are of a Marxist, communist nature that create false events. This Nicholas Cruz, by the way, Ammon, I want you to know this. This Nicholas Cruz, some 30-some contacts with law enforcement, and they all let him go. You want to know why they let him go? Because by letting him go, they continued to collect federal grant money. All of these rabbit holes down, were there 3 or there were 10 or there were 20 shooters? This is all subterfuge. The truth is simpler. It's more accurate in that the greed of these Marxist communists under Obama and under this federal grant program called the Promise. And folks, for those of you out there that don't think that promise may be in your community, check it out, because I did. And it's in Oregon where I was, and I guarantee you it's probably in Arizona where I am now. Promise grant program to reduce the pipeline from school to prison for marginalized, this is the language they use, for marginalized peoples. Well, marginalized peoples is a buzzword for Marxist communism, because I look at myself as an American. The dude that I rode up here on the plane, who was black as the ace of spades, and we had a blast talking together, we consider ourselves to be Americans. Not black Americans, not white Americans, not any other kind of identifier / Americans, but Americans. And this is what we're at war against. A false narrative with huge amounts of money. And this is why I bring up the whole Parkland thing. It's not because of any conspiracy theory, but this is fact. Conservative treehouse, kids' lives for cash. Those of you out there, look into it. The Promise Grant Program, it created the environment for the Parkland shooting. Nicholas Cruz had some 30-some contacts with law enforcement. He should have been in jail or an institution, but he wasn't, because they kept letting him go, because as they kept letting him go, they made more money. How sick
well,
is
even,
that?
even to go a little further, not that I need to, but he may have been, at one of his earlier offenses, he may have been corrected, which,
Sure.
I hesitate to say, but there would have been at least a chance, of him,
Intervention of some sort?
Yeah, some intervention of some sort. But what they were doing is they were justifying him in his actions in order to line their own pockets. And that's exactly what federal funding does. And
Yes.
it's exactly what our founders talked about when they warned us against allowing the federal government to tax the people directly.
Amen.
And then using that funding to put the people in undue obedience.
Amen.
And I mean, that's exactly what it is. And if we're really getting down to something now, because one of the most wicked attempts and attacks on our freedom happened in 1913. It's called the 16th Amendment.
Oh,
and in the same year is the 17th Amendment. Both of those, what we're talking right now, the 16th Amendment basically made it to where the federal government can now tax the people directly. Take that money right out of your paycheck.
Oh, we're going down a rabbit hole now, man.
And then do whatever they want with it, including these federal grants to the local law enforcement, and with memorandums of understandings that they will not arrest individuals.
Yes.
As what was the term that you called it? What was the term of these individuals of minority individuals, or what?
Marginalized peoples under a marginal policy.
I mean that is all. If the federal government did not have the funds that they've literally stolen from the people's paychecks,
pimped,
then they would not be able to, manipulate our law enforcement forces, our police forces. They would not be able to manipulate our schools. They would not be able to. I mean, the list. It's amazing. They would not be able to put armed forces all over the world.
Yeah,
but
I wasn't gonna go back to this, but I think it's important. When you and I spent time in Pahrump, I shared with you certain information regarding our research, and I go back. I don't speak out of opinion. And I'm going to say that there is a very respected professor. His name is Thomas Woods, and he gave a presentation on the 14th Amendment. And that presentation we're going to share with you right now. Okay, now that presentation by Thomas Woods that explained to you that there were literally representatives of states who were kidnapped under duress. And folks, for those of you out there that might say that we're pro-slavery, nothing of the sort. I don't believe that Ammon or myself or anyone else or Thomas Woods or anyone else believes that slavery is justifiable. Okay? So let's just delve just 1 second into the research that Bruce Ray Riggs and myself have presented to the American people, along with Thomas Woods and many others. Representatives were kidnapped to meet their quorum to justify the ratification of an amendment that was never lawfully ratified. And when I say that, President Andrew Johnson was sequestered in the Blair House under gunpoint. He said two things during two veto addresses of this amendment. The law itself will become unlawful, and in the other veto address, there will become a de facto government. De facto. We always hear that, de facto. President. I'm not talking about some squirrely politician from Iowa. President of the United States, Andrew Johnson, said that this will create a de facto government. Why? Because we are citizens of our independent nation states. These states are very much like countries. And what he was saying was that the creation of 14th Amendment U.S. citizenship meant that there was a now nationalized citizenship. Folks, this was the communist citizenship that was implemented in the United States. We can prove by conclusive documentation and evidence on the congressional record that not only Andrew Johnson, the President of the United States, did not sign this, but that the Secretary of State, Andrew Johnson, signed two executive orders that were fake in that he was not the executive. Folks, this is what bothers me. And what bothers me is when we have a process which is lawful, and we have a process which is subverted, say in 1868, which is a long time ago, granted, but when you have a subverted process in 1868, and we keep going on from there, doesn't it not require us to return back to the point where a fraud or a crime was committed and say, hey, we have a problem here. This needs to, at very least, needs to be discussed. Is that not unreasonable?
No, not at all. And it's because of these things, you know, and uncovering them and people seeing the truth that causes people to say, you know, I no longer am going to fund, you know, this wickedness.
Right.
I'm no longer going to do this. I'm no longer going to, you know, participate in it. I feel like if I participate in it, then I'm contributing to it. I'm supporting it and helping it. And then on the other hand, you have, you know, your good Republicans who want to say, well, you got to pay your taxes, you know, or he's a good Republican who pays his taxes. He's a good law-abiding citizen. I mean, how many times have you heard that? And well, wait a minute. Who's the ignorant one? It reminds me of my neighbor who actually, when he was probably before I was even born, he had a battle with the government, and his church leader called him in and said, hey, what are you doing? You're going against the law, and that's not what we do, you know. And he said to his ecclesiastical leader, he said, who is better to obey the law? One who knows it or one who doesn't?
Amen. Amen.
Know? And that's how you feel when you talk to these people, you know, that just want to say, pay your taxes, or, you know, pay, like in my dad's case, pay your grazing fees. Well,
yeah.
Absolutely not. You
refuse.
know?
I refuse to consent to contract with people that are trying to railroad me. How hard is that to understand?
Yeah, I have a business in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona, and at one time it was a pretty nice fleet maintenance business. And you know, since 2 years in thrown in prison and all that's been hard on it. But I literally have told myself that, because I'm literally a tax collector for the federal government. I mean, I write, you know.
No, yeah, I get it. I get it.
I do payroll, and I see my employees, and I just feel for them, because I see, you know, they've got families, they got other, and I see, you know, I write them, let's say a $1,200 or $13, maybe a $15, or even a, you know, whatever it is, like say a $1,500 paycheck a week, right? And I see $400 or $500 or sometimes even $600 of that goes to, you know, federal taxes.
Oh.
And that's just one employee. And then you go through the list. And so, you know, I'm
just so what we need is a couple more bureaucrats, right?
Yeah, I'm writing thousands of dollars a week to the federal government. And I'm just a little business. I'm just a small little business, right?
Yeah.
And then what are they doing with that? You know, they're taking that money and plotting to destroy my family.
Don't you know? $450 for a toilet seat, and $800 for a bench. Come on, you know.
But they've spent over $100 million prosecuting us.
That's the real secret.
And here I am literally taking money out of my pocket, out of my employees' pockets, you know, that is hard earned, and giving it to this, you know, entity that is using it, just wasting it, and I'm taking a good, you know, chunk of that to try to actually destroy me and my family, my loved ones. And at some point, I've literally said that if they come after me again, I'm going to put a big banner about 50 foot long, because I actually have a shop on a, you know, kind of a corner of a main street, saying no longer I'm not going to fund the federal government in the destruction of my family.
I got to ask you a question. You know, not to toot my own horn, but like I designed that Harney County Resource Center sign, can I design the banner, Ammon?
Yeah. No longer am I going to fund the federal government in the destruction of my family.
I'm with you, brother.
You know, and who in their right mind would do that? You know, I know they say, well, give unto Caesar what is Caesar and unto God what is God. And most people mistranslate or not misunderstand.
They do misinterpret
what the Lord was teaching, misinterpret. But on the same hand, I would be insane, and so would they be insane, to think that they can continue to come after my family, unwarranted, unjustified. They have been exposed. The wickedness has been clearly shown to the people.
Yes, it has.
And they still come after me. Do you think I am going to be loyal to that type of system, that government?
Yeah, I get you. Ammon, I have to tell you, you know that I'm still under federal probation, and I have no fear, because I stand in the Lord to tell you that I stand with you, liberty or death. That's a fact. And I don't mean that because of the Bundys, but I mean that because the cause of which you stand, I believe, not because of a Bundy, not because of a Finicum, not because of any other reason, but because I And everything that I've researched, and everybody that listens to my show knows I'm a constitutional historian. I've read back through the congressional record going all the way back to the beginning. I believe that the most important stand in American history today is exactly the stand that your family took. I mean that with my heart, brother.
Well, it certainly has been a great trial and blessing to so many because of that courageous, valiant stand that my father took and said, no more. It's put our lives into a tremendous...
What an amazing man.
Whirlwind.
Salt of the earth.
Yeah, but it was the right thing to do. And Malheur was the right thing to do.
It sure was.
This conversation that we're having right now, and the many conversations and the tremendous exposure and uncovering and education would not have happened if we did not make a stand, in that Malheur. And the Hammonds wouldn't be home.
That's right.
No one person.
Praise God, right?
Yeah. And no one person can take responsibility. No one person can take responsibility for the Hammonds being home.
No,
but
I understand that.
There is
doubt
in my mind. There is no doubt in my mind that if the Refuge did not happen, the Hammonds would not be home.
I agree.
They would not be. They're not just home.
I agree.
They're fully exonerated.
Completely exonerated.
They are not felons anymore. They were felons, and as a rancher, how do you go and defend your cattle against predators as a felon? And
I know.
I'm not saying that other, that just the right to self-defense is,
No, Ammon,
just that alone.
Let me back up what you're saying. A long time ago, I got very sick. There's a lot of things that happened in my life. I made a lot of mistakes, and I developed, even though all of those mistakes that I made, when I came to the point where I knew that the Hammonds were being unjustly persecuted upon, I knew what I was risking by coming there, but there's been something that happened to me previous to this. Jesus Christ entered my life, and my sins were washed away. And the way I looked at it was, regardless of whatever designation the government chose to label, I knew what a righteous cause was. My father, he was a judge, I told you many times. He was a Democrat judge, but he was a judge. But he really, in his heart, sought justice for people. He didn't want people to be unduly burdened by the government for nonviolent offenses, things that didn't hurt other people. And he used the weight of his office to try and help people to effectuate that objective. And I have to say that not only do I not regret coming, knowing that I could risk what I did, your father made me want to be, and I'm not holding him up to be any kind of a figure or anything other than a man, because I only worship Jesus Christ. But your father, and speaking with your brother Ryan, made me want to be a better man, made me seek and desire to stand up for my fellow man who I had no personal interest in anything that the Hammonds were doing. You can say that. Out of all the people that showed up, how many people had a personal interest in Hammonds? Anybody?
Not very many. I mean,
but for the righteousness of the cause.
Yeah, I mean, they understood and did have a love for them, but most of them didn't, know them personally at all. Never meet them.
No. But we stood because folks out there in the listening audience, they came for the fishermen. I didn't stand because I wasn't a fisherman. They came for the rancher. Well, I didn't stand because I wasn't a rancher. And they came for me. Oh, there was nobody like me because everybody else had been taken. The point is when you see an injustice that is so egregious, that is so wrongful, if you don't stand and risk your life, your liberty, your fortune, your sacred honor. We've heard these things since we were children, so what are we to do with them? What are we to learn from these things? These things are godly things. These things are so godly. Romans 1, wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanliness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. Think about this for a minute, folks. These folks, the Hammonds, the Bundys, and many other people like them, the 40-some that came before the Bundys that were economically terrorized into submission, those who took a stand didn't take a stand for themselves. They took a stand for you out there in the listening audience. You and your families, your cousins, your brothers, your sisters. And isn't that right, Ammon?
That's exactly right. And the understanding that I had and what motivated me to get involved in the Hammond case was an understanding that what is happening to the Hammonds will happen to families all across this country.
All of us.
And what is happening in Harney County will happen all across this country if we do not stand and stop it. Mm-hmm. And you know what? We are being successful. We have been successful.
Dude, not for anything, but you were blessed.
By the hand of the Lord.
Oh my God, yes. Oh yeah.
And I mean, I mean, there's not that we haven't had, huge pains and there have, been great sacrifices.
I lost over a year of my life, and so many more have lost so much more than I ever have.
But it has been.
It was worth it
for a cause that is just and honorable, and it has been effective.
Ammon,
it will continue to be.
Ammon, out of all of you guys that were found not guilty, some of my listeners have asked me, well, so why did you take a plea? They asked me. I want to answer that with you on the air right now. Ladies and gentlemen, I had been very sick for a very long time with Lyme disease. And this is not a comfortable subject for me to talk about, but I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to be transparent. When I became sick, the federal government was preventing doctors from treating my condition, which is called Lyme disease, with anything including antibiotics. There's many reasons for that. You guys can go down that rabbit trail on your own. You can Google Aaron and Melissa Dyke's investigation into Plum Island and Lyme disease. But more importantly, I had, because of my illness, had not been the best person that I could have been. And I made a lot of mistakes. And out of those mistakes, I regret, but I can honestly say that I never had a victim. I've never harmed anyone. I've never hurt anyone, but I did make mistakes. But there came a point in my life that I turned my life to Jesus Christ. When I turned my life to Jesus Christ, all of those things, they were lifted off of my shoulders like a weight. And I'm far from perfect. I'm not claiming to be anything remotely close to being perfect. I still have a journey to go on. I remember sitting with Ryan in the melon patch at the Bundy Ranch, and him lecturing me, and the information that he imparted to me is still resonating with me today. But folks, I want you to hear this, because this is my testimony. These were my mistakes, and those mistakes led me to a felony. Now, Ammon, when you called and told me about what was going on in Oregon, I was in Texas. I was aware. I didn't make you aware. I did not make you aware. I was aware that I already had a felony on my record. And I said to myself, and I prayed, Lord, I could bear punishment just for showing up for this thing. But please tell me what you want me to do. And the message that I was given was to go. And in that, out of all of that, in the prison, I got to witness to so many people, including that corrections officer that I told you about. And I say to people out there, don't you people out there fear anything but the Lord.
Exactly.
Don't fear because he will put you in a place that you may feel persecuted, you may be abused, but you witness to one person. And that difference makes all the difference in the world to another person that they may come in contact with. Is that not true, Ammon?
It is so true. Never, ever make a decision on fear. Fear does not come from God. It's the opposite of faith.
Amen.
And that's such a great story, because you came because you knew what was right.
Yep.
And you suppressed any fear that was, trying to influence you. And if you would have followed that, you wouldn't have come.
I wouldn't.
You wouldn't have come. You wouldn't have experienced the great spirits and the blessings so much. So you also
wonderful
wouldn't have,
thing.
You also would not have been put in prison for a year.
But that's
which
okay.
again was a blessing to you.
Which
was a blessing to you.
Hey, you
and
and I
all of that and then
you and I got a chance.
It was amazing.
Right? They landed me right in the same unit with you, and you and I. Not only did we share information and prayer and all of, look, Ammon, when it comes down to it, was that God works in mysterious ways, and he put us in the same unit out of all the units they could have put me in, folks out there, so that I've never told this
all the
really.
Places but all the places in the country, Tom.
Yeah.
We ended up not just in the same facility, but in the same pod, just a few beds down from each other.
Yeah. And the time that we made of that was so important. And when I left there, the time that I spent among other people and the sharing of the message, we were people, people that were under such emotional turmoil, drug addiction, all kinds of other ailments and infirmities, but the blessings that I had to minister to other people, the message of freedom, the message of God, the message of a better purpose. Dude, I had people walk up to me shaking my hand and crying, bro, and saying thank you to me. And I'm not anybody. I just shared to them my story. But these people, the message of freedom, liberty, of God, of what's right, resonated within their souls. I saw such amazing things when I was in prison. I told my wife had said to me, "Oh, you were gone for so long." And I said, it was all meant to be. Because I took that time and I ministered to other people the message of the Lord Jesus Christ. How much better of an opportunity could I ever get in my life? You could give me a position as an executive in a company would not come close to in comparison to the opportunity that I was given going through this institution. That's pretty powerful, brother.
So powerful. So powerful.
Yes, sir. And I have to say, Brian, who took the time to sit down with me in the melon patch on our butts in the dirt, I'll never forget that. And you and I that got to spend time there in Peru. It meant a lot to me. But I want to say to the people out there, the Bundys are salt of the earth people, but they're people. They are people. They are men, just like I am. Folks, the real prize, the real focus is the Lord Jesus Christ. He is the only man that ever walked the face of the earth, in my opinion, that was ever perfect. Ammon, Ryan, myself, and many others were imperfect men. We're not to be worshipped as idols or anything else. But I have to say, Ammon, I respect you. I respect your position on things. I think it's spot on. I really wish from the bottom of my heart that people, especially in the state of Nevada, would look to your brother Ryan as a potential governor of their state. I don't think that they even come close to realizing the freedom that they could live under a righteous man. And can I get just a few of your thoughts on your brother running for governor?
Yeah, you are right in your words. And one thing that has become apparent to me, and because there's been a lot of squirming behind the scenes, as you will, by the Republican Party.
Oh, I know.
When it comes to Ryan, and these leaders have contacted me, contacted people that have, interest in Ryan and a relationship with Ryan, trying to get him to drop out of the race.
Hey, I have an idea.
And
how about if they were to waken up to the point that Ryan is what we need and to embrace him?
Well, exactly, and this is where, I had an individual called me yesterday. I missed his phone call, so I called him back this morning. And I have great love and respect. And he says one of these, influential Republican Party leaders called him because he knew that he had a relationship with Ryan. And he wanted him to talk Ryan into dropping out of the race. And he said, the individual that I was talking to said, I listened to him and their theory and their thought and all of that. And at first I was like almost convinced that they were right. He goes, and then I called a few people, that I've relied on, for political advice and kind of anything. And one of them is actually a very staunch Republican in the state of Nevada. And she said, I won't mention any names, but she says, you know, the last time the Republican Party got control of the House, the Senate, and the governorship, I was a very influential part of that. And we pushed so hard to get that control. And she says that year, Nevada, those Republicans passed the largest tax bill ever known in the history of Nevada. And
wow.
she says, with Adam Laxalt, who is the running, Republican candidate, if he is to get in there, the same thing will happen. And basically fully endorsing my brother. And really what it comes down to is Nevada can have the same thing that they've always had, or they can have Ryan Bundy, because he's really the only choice. And
amazing choice with that. Yeah.
He is the only, and it's amazing because what he will do. Everybody wants to say, well, what is Ryan Bundy going to do? What he's going to do is get out of the people's way. He's going to free them. So it's not a whole lot of what he's going to do. It's just a matter of what he's going to clear out.
Cannot do, right? My message to conservatives, if, we can put a letter on the end of our name, a D or an R. But if you out there listening to this broadcast, if you believe in true conservatism, and when I mean by true conservatism, I mean by classic liberalism, by paleo-conservatism, I mean by do not tread upon me mentality. I have to say to the folks out there, I know Ryan Bundy personally. And I know that whether you're in an African American community in Las Vegas or you're in a ranching community in Mesquite, what he wants for you is to be left alone. Is to be left alone. Do you hear me? Hear me, public. He wants you to be left alone. How quintessential American can that message be? You have been, if you believe, for any stretch of the imagination, that the Bundys are racist because that's what the mainstream media wants you to believe, don't fall for it. My best friends are Mexican, African American, and Native American. My wife, sitting in the next room from me right now is Native American. I assure you that she wants your governor to be Ryan Bundy. Why? Because Ryan Bundy wants you to live by your own means. He wants you to live free, unencumbered. He wants you to not be tread upon. I think that's safe to say, don't you, Ammon?
I think that's a great description of Ryan and his desires for the Nevadans, and I hope that they give him that chance. I mean, it will be absolutely amazing, and yeah, it's going to completely rock the boat of the establishment there in the state.
Well,
of that
it just goes to show you
of the swamp. But,
yeah, it goes to show you that if they don't, if the Republican establishment does not embrace him, they're only showing that who they truly are. And folks, let me take you back. As a historian, Ammon, I have to go here. As a historian, in the 1930s, William Crystal departed from the left and came over to the conservative right. He was a avowed and admitted Trotskyite. Okay? And for those of you that may not understand what a Trotskyite is, it is a subscriber to at least in part, a Marxist ideology, that took on the flavor of conservatism and traditional values, but still believed in the redistribution of wealth, socialism, big government, all of that, but only in the flavor of conservatism. And with Ryan Bundy, what we stand to gain, not just, I'm an Arizonan. I'm not a Nevadan. I'm telling you folks in Nevada, what you stand to gain with Ryan Bundy is an absolute, true, unapologetic, unabashed, true conservative that believes in every individual right, from the person in the absolute inner city to the country, to the ranchers, to the farmers, to those that live in the inner city that work for the casinos and everything else. You really want freedom. You really want government out of your lives. I have to advocate. I'm sorry, Ammon. I don't mean to get on a soapbox, but I have to advocate because I've spoken to your brother in the melon patch. Not only have I spoken in the melon patch, but I stood beside African American and Native American individuals at the Bundy Ranch, defending the Bundy Ranch because they believed in the cause of freedom. And people have been propagandized by the mainstream media to believe in false premises because of excerpt statements that came. But folks, when I tell you, my wife is in the next room and she is a Native American Cherokee, and the one person that she adores out of this entire thing that happened is Ryan Bundy. That should speak for itself. You should really think about what the BIA and other federal agencies are telling you and propagandizing you to believe. And that was also another message, Ammon, of Lavoie. Remember the video that Lavoie and I and Blaine Cooper and David Fry did about the Native American artifacts? Folks, please come out here. Please take possession of your cultural heritage because it's not being respected. You guys were painted as being the destructors of the Native American artifacts. And while the truth was that for the past 30 years, the federal government was really guilty of that offense. And Lavoie, when I took this information to him, he did a video. I'm sure you've seen the video, Ammon, where he said, Paiute people, here's your stuff. It's in rat droppings next to a water heater it's about to explode. It's not being treated with respect. Please come and talk to us so that we can give you your cultural heritage. And it wasn't 2 days later that he was gunned down, Ammon. Yeah. 2 days later. And I'm going to go here real quick, and I told myself I wasn't going to do this, but I want to do this to clear the air because a lot of people I've gotten a lot of emails from people. Ammon, was I ever kicked out of the Malheur Refuge?
No, you were not.
Thank you. Was I ever kicked out of the Bundy Ranch?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. And for the folks out there, the people like the detractors, and I'm not going to give them their name or their publicity, I assure you, I stand for principle. And Ammon, I'm going to admit to you right now, there's going to be people that can throw up my record from many years ago. I'm not proud of, Ammon. But as Christians, when we give our lives to Jesus Christ, does he not wash us of our sins?
That is the whole reason he came. And gave his
Exactly.
life.
So if you're a Christian out there and you want to paint me, please paint me for something present. Because for the past 10 or so plus years, I have stood in obedience, not to any man on the face of this earth, but one that walked, which was Jesus Christ. And I've stood in respect to others that have stood with him, like Ammon and Ryan and Cliven and Lavoie. Respect to, worship of only one man, that is Jesus Christ. Ammon, could you lead us out in a prayer?
Sure. I would love to do that. Our dear Heavenly Father, we are grateful for this time that we have had to discuss these many topics. We're thankful for the spirit and passion that Thou hast given us to understand and do our best to articulate Thy law, true principles, the natural laws in which Thou hast given us. And we know and believe and have seen and witnessed when we follow these laws as a people that we are in peace and tranquility, that our lives individually and collectively are happy and exciting and excited and full of life. And when we turn away from these natural laws that Thou hast placed upon us in this life, that we are confused and full of turmoil and that there is chaos about, and that we experience these things because simply we either do not understand or we turn away from the simple laws and principles that are based and placed here by Thy wisdom. We pray, Father, that many, many more in this country and across these lands and throughout the world will see these principles, freedom, these natural laws, and understand them and live by them, and love their neighbor and stand up for their neighbor when their neighbor's rights are being violated. That we may have peace and that we may live on in a few more generations with prosperity and peace and happiness. This is our desire. We know that it is because of Thy Son that has come and sacrificed and taught us these things, that we can be forgiven and that all things can happen. And we are grateful for that, Father. We ask for Thy blessings to be upon us. We know that Thou hast protected us. It is by Thy hand that we speak here today. And we love Thee. We love our country. We love the people around us. And we say these things with gratitude in the name of Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. I have only one thing to add. If you don't mind if I continue in your prayer. Heavenly Father, I thank you for the opportunity that you have given me to rise for what I consider brothers and or sisters who were unjustly oppressed. Father, I know that I am an imperfect person who has made mistakes, many in my life, that you have cleansed me of. Father, I know that you have given me the strength, and I know that you have given me the backbone to not fear. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, Father, for thou art with me. And as Galatians 5, verse 13 says, for you were called to freedom, brothers. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but use it to love, to serve one another. Father, this verse I've taken to heart, and through all of my faults, I stand to continue to stand for my fellow brothers and sisters, regardless of what threat that may cause to me, because I believe in the Spirit and the power of the Lord Jesus Christ to stand and give me a backbone in my life, to give me the ability to stand, to serve the Lord and not myself. Lord, please give this broadcast a reach that will reach out to maybe the one individual out there, one or 1,000, Lord, it doesn't matter to me, but 1 or 1,000, that it will touch their heart and bring them to you, Lord. Heavenly Father, please give me the strength to do all the things that I need to do to cleanse my personal life, to be worthy of you, and to be worthy of the blessings of liberty and freedom that you unalienably give to me and to others. In the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Ammon, you know you're forever my brother.
Absolutely.
If there's anything that we at Resurrect the Republic, this broadcast, can do for you or for Ryan or for anyone else, all you need to do is pick up the phone. And you know, there's one other thing that I just wanted to delve into very briefly that I hear in emails. Oh, have you turned Mormon? Hey, you know what? I visit with the missionaries regularly. We have wonderful conversations. And I don't know the future of my progression, but I can say to people out there, folks, regardless of whether you're LDS or just a Christian, please don't get trapped in the belief that you have to be something to stand for the cause of liberty and freedom for Jesus Christ. I am leaning towards some certain paths that were shown to me in the melon patch, Ammon. And you and I did have a very wonderful time that I will never forget. You know, how many people can say, Ammon, that they had a really wonderful time in federal prison? Praise the Lord, right?
Yeah.
So that in and of itself should be a symbol. Ammon, thank you for joining us tonight at Resurrect the Republic, and I hope this will be the the one of many interviews that we have in the future. And I God bless your family, your wife, and it's so nice to have you home with your own. It's so nice that God gave us this victory and shown even the most liberal of courts that the charges were to be dismissed with prejudice. So I want to say to you tonight from our audience at Resurrect the Republic, God bless you and we're with you. And if ever you need us or myself, say the word.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
All right.
Let's do it again.
Yes, sir. All right. I'll talk to you soon, brother. God bless you.
Okay. You too. Take care, my brother.
Yes, sir.